Red wine rained down her face as the restaurant froze, humiliation drowning her while those thugs laughed. Then the door slammed. Every candle flickered, and the Mafia boss who feared nothing saw his favorite waitress kneeling in shame. His jaw clenched, his voice dropped to a whisper, colder than death, and what happened next made the entire room question whether mercy or judgment would decide who walked out alive. If you're hooked in and want to enjoy this story, go ahead and subscribe. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see where everyone's watching. Plus, tomorrow I've got another incredible story lined up, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Alright, back to the story. The sound of shattering glass cut through the warm jazz inside La Perla Rosso. A wine bottle rolled across polished marble, leaving a crimson trail like freshly spilled blood. The young waitress knelt on trembling knees, her white blouse soaked deep red, wine dripping from her dark hair down her face. Two men in matching black polo shirts and trousers stood over her, their laughter echoing off the candlelit walls as diners froze with forks halfway to their mouths. One of them tilted another bottle, pouring slowly, deliberately. And then the entrance door swung open with such force that every candle flame flickered. Eva Seeley had been working at La Perla Rosso for 3 years. 3 years of double shifts, aching feet, and forced smiles at men who looked through her like she was part of the furniture. But she never complained. The tips were good. The owner, Mr. Bellows, treated her with quiet respect that felt rare in this part of Manhattan. And most nights, the worst she dealt with was a handsy tourist or an impatient businessman. Tonight was different. It started with an accident. A simple, stupid accident. Ava had been balancing 4 plates of osso buco when Vince, one of Mr. Bellows' men, pushed his chair back without warning. She'd tried to pivot, tried to catch herself, but physics and exhaustion won. The wine glass on her tray tipped, spilling Barolo down the front of Vince's black polo shirt. "You stupid," Vince shot to his feet, red wine spreading across his chest like a wound. "I'm so sorry, sir. Please, let me." Eva reached for a napkin, her hands shaking. "Let you what?" Leo, the other man in black, grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron. "Make it worse? You just ruined a $200 shirt, sweetheart." "200?" Vince's voice rose, drawing stares from nearby tables. "Try 3. Custom made." Eva's throat tightened. "I'll pay for it. I can take it out of my tips. Please, I didn't mean..." "Your tips?" Vince laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think your poverty wages cover disrespecting me?" The restaurant had gone quiet. Even the jazz seemed to dim, as if the trumpet player sensed the shift in the air. Other diners pretended to focus on their plates, but Eva could feel their eyes, watching, judging, waiting. "Get on your knees," Leo said. Eva blinked. "What?" "You heard him." Vince grabbed a fresh bottle of Barolo from a nearby table. "You spilled wine on me. Now we're gonna see how you like it." "Please," I said I was sorry. "Knees, now." Leo shoved her shoulder, and Eva's legs buckled. The marble was cold and hard beneath her stockings. She could see the bottom hem of tablecloths, expensive shoes, the scattered fragments of the glass she'd dropped. Vince uncorked the bottle with a theatrical pop. "You know what your problem is?" He circled her slowly, like a predator. "You don't understand respect. You walk around here like you're somebody, but you're just the help." "Vince, maybe we should..." Another diner started to stand. "Sit down." Leo's voice was flat, final. The diner sat. The first pour was cold. Eva gasped as wine splashed over her head, soaking through her hair, running down her face and neck. The rich, bitter smell filled her nose. She squeezed her eyes shut, her hands pressed flat against her thighs, trying to hold on to some shred of dignity. "Oops," Vince said. Laughter rippled through the watching men. "Look at that. Now we match." Another pour. Eva's white blouse clung to her skin, transparent now, humiliating. She heard a woman gasp somewhere to her left, heard chairs scraping, but no one intervened. No one ever did. "That's enough, guys, come on." A waiter's voice, young and uncertain. "It's enough when I say it's enough," Vince snapped. He raised the bottle again, tipping it slowly, letting the wine stream down in a deliberate arc. Eva's quiet sobs were barely audible beneath the jazz, beneath the cruel laughter, beneath the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. And then, the entrance door swung open with such force that every candle flame flickered. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stood at the threshold, tattooed hands visible beneath rolled sleeves. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with the precision of a surgeon examining a wound. The laughter died instantly. The bottle in Vince's hand froze mid-pour. Ralph Bellows had returned. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, almost gentle. "Vince, that's my waitress." The bottle slipped from Vince's hand and exploded against the marble floor. Ralph Bellows didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone had transformed La Perla Rosso from a dining room into a courtroom, and every man in that restaurant knew it. The jazz record skipped once, twice. Then someone had the sense to turn it off completely. Silence pressed down like a heavy hand. Vince stood frozen, wine dripping from his fingers onto the marble. Leo had taken 2 steps back, his face pale beneath the chandelier light. Eva remained on her knees, trembling, her white blouse now a ruin of burgundy stains. "Stand up, Eva." Ralph's voice was calm, almost soft. But there was something beneath it, something cold and vast as an ocean trench. Eva tried. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. Her whole body shook with humiliation and relief and terror all tangled together. She managed to get 1 foot under her, slipped on spilled wine, and would have fallen again if Ralph hadn't crossed the room in 3 strides and caught her elbow. His grip was firm but surprisingly gentle. "Easy," he said, guiding her upright. "You're okay now." He smelled like expensive cologne and cigar smoke. Up close, Eva could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. She'd served him 100 Thursday dinners, but she'd never been this close. Never seen the tattoos that covered his hands and disappeared beneath his shirt cuffs, symbols she didn't understand, stories written in ink. "Thank you, Mr. Bellows," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything wrong." He said it like it was a fact, not an opinion. Then he turned to face Vince and Leo, and his expression changed. Not angry, worse than angry, disappointed. Ralph Bellows had rules. Everyone who worked for him knew them, feared them, lived by them. Don't steal from your own. Don't lie to the family. Don't hurt women or children. Those weren't suggestions. They were laws carved in stone, enforced with brutal efficiency. 20 years ago, Ralph had been nobody. Just another kid from Hell's Kitchen with hungry eyes and quick hands, running numbers for men who thought he'd always be small. But Ralph understood something those men didn't. Violence without discipline was just chaos. Power without principle was just noise. He'd built his empire brick by careful brick, body by necessary body. He took what he wanted, yes. Eliminated obstacles, absolutely. But he had limits, lines he wouldn't cross. Because he'd seen what happened when men became monsters, he'd watched his own father beat his mother so badly she never smiled quite right again. He'd held his sister Maria in his arms as she died from an infection after a back alley abortion, crying because the boy who'd gotten her pregnant was too important to touch, too connected to punish. Ralph was 17 when Maria died. The boy responsible was 19, son of a capo in the Genovese family, untouchable. Ralph touched him anyway. It took 3 months of planning, 2 weeks of patience, and 1 knife in a dark alley. After that, everyone knew. Ralph Bellows had a code. Cross it, and your connections wouldn't save you. Your money wouldn't save you. Nothing would save you. Now, 30 years later, he stood in his own restaurant, looking at 2 men he'd trusted with his name, his reputation, his protection, and they'd used it to humiliate a waitress who'd shown him nothing but quiet kindness. Eva didn't know about the nights Ralph came in after particularly bloody work. Didn't know that her simple gesture of staying late to make him fresh coffee, asking gently if he wanted company or preferred to be alone, had been the only human warmth he'd felt in weeks. She couldn't know that her smile reminded him of Maria's not the face, but the spirit. That stubborn goodness that refused to dim even in darkness. "Boss," Vince started. Ralph raised 1 finger. Vince's mouth snapped shut. "Eva," Ralph said, still watching his men, "go to my office. There's a bathroom, clean clothes in the closet. Take your time. When you're ready, come back out. Mr. Bellows, I can just..." It's not a request. But his tone was kind. "Go." Eva glanced at Vince and Leo, then hurried toward the back hallway, leaving wet footprints of wine across the marble. The moment she disappeared through the door, Ralph's expression hardened into something ancient and pitiless. "Lock the doors," he said quietly. One of the waiters, Danny, barely 20, moved immediately to the entrance, turning the deadbolt with shaking hands. Another waiter locked the kitchen entrance. The diners sat frozen, silverware forgotten, meals cooling on plates. "Nobody leaves," Ralph said, unbuttoning his suit jacket with slow deliberation, "until I understand what respect costs in my house." He pulled out the chair at Eva's abandoned table and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. His tattooed hands rested on the white tablecloth, perfectly still. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silent room like thunder. "Whose hands opened that bottle?" Neither Vince nor Leo answered. They stood in the center of La Perla Rosso like statues, wine still dripping from their fingers, faces pale beneath the warm glow of chandeliers that now felt accusatory rather than romantic. The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Whose hands opened that bottle? Ralph didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Every person in that restaurant understood they were witnessing something rare and terrible, not an explosion of violence, but its opposite, the calm before annihilation. Vince finally found his voice. "Boss, listen, she spilled wine on me first. On my shirt. I asked whose hands." Ralph's tone didn't change. Not whose mouth, not whose excuse. Whose hands. Leo cleared his throat. It was both of us, Mr. Bellows. Both. Ralph nodded slowly, as if considering this new information. He looked around the restaurant, taking in the frozen diners, the waiters pressed against walls, the musicians huddled by their instruments. Did anyone else see what happened before my men decided to baptize my employee in $70 wine? An older woman at a corner table raised a trembling hand. The waitress. She bumped into the chair. It was an accident. She apologized immediately. An accident, Ralph repeated. He looked back at Vince. "So you poured wine on a woman's head because she had an accident?" "It was disrespectful," Vince said, heat creeping into his voice despite the danger. "She made me look like a fool in front of—" "You made yourself look like a fool." Ralph's words cut clean as a blade. "And now you've made me look worse. Do you know what that costs?" Vince's jaw worked. He glanced at Leo, who had the sense to stay quiet. Ralph stood, buttoning his jacket with precise movements. He walked to the bar, where bottles lined mahogany shelves like soldiers at attention. He selected one, a Barolo, the same vintage Vince had poured over Eva, and returned to his table. The sound of his footsteps against marble was the only noise in the room. "Danny," Ralph said to the young waiter by the door, "bring me a glass. Clean." Danny scrambled to comply, nearly dropping the stemware twice before setting it carefully on Ralph's table. Ralph filled it halfway, held it up to the candlelight, examined the deep red color with the attention of a jeweler appraising a diamond. "Beautiful, isn't it?" He took a sip, let it rest on his tongue. Notes of cherry, tobacco, leather. "This bottle costs $240. Do you know why?" No one answered. "Because someone cared." Ralph set the glass down gently. "A winemaker in Piedmont spent years nursing these grapes. Picked them at exactly the right moment. Aged them in oak barrels with patience most men don't have. All that work, all that time, so that people like us could sit in places like this and pretend we're civilized." He looked at Vince, then at Leo. "But we're not civilized, are we? We're animals who learn to wear suits. And the only thing separating us from the beasts in the street is this," he tapped his chest, "the ability to control ourselves, to choose restraint over impulse, to understand that true power isn't about what you can do, it's about what you choose not to do." Vince's hands were shaking now. Leo had gone completely still, barely breathing. Ralph picked up his wine glass again, swirling it gently. "Eva Seeley works 3 jobs. Did you know that? She sends money to her mother in Honduras every month, never misses a shift, never complains. And when I come in here after particularly difficult nights, she's the only person who looks at me like I'm still human." He set the glass down with a soft clink. "So when you put your hands on her, when you humiliated her in my house, in front of my guests, you didn't just disrespect a waitress." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You disrespected me." The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Several diners pulled their jackets tighter. "Boss, we didn't think," Leo started. "No, you didn't." Ralph walked toward them slowly, each step deliberate. "And that's the problem. You thought my name was permission. You thought my protection was a license for cruelty. You forgot that every privilege I give comes with responsibility. Every freedom has limits." He stopped 3 feet away. close enough that they could see the darkness in his eyes, the absolute certainty of a man who'd killed before and would kill again if necessary. "Kneel," Ralph said softly. "What?" Vince's voice cracked. "You heard me, both of you. Kneel in front of these people, the same way you made Eva kneel." "Boss, please." "Kneel." The word echoed like a gunshot. Slowly, Vince lowered himself to the marble floor. Leo followed, their black polo shirts stark against the wine-stained ground. The restaurant watched in absolute silence as two grown men enforcers, criminals, men used to inspiring fear, knelt like penitents before an altar. Ralph stood over them, judgment incarnate. "Now we begin." Ralph walked back to the bar with measured steps, his shoes clicking against marble like a metronome counting down to judgment. The restaurant remained frozen diners too terrified to move, waiters pressed against walls like shadows, even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Vince and Leo knelt in the center of it all, their heads bowed, sweat beginning to bead on their forebrows despite the restaurant's careful climate control. "Antonio," Ralph called to the head waiter. "Bring me the bottle they used, the one they poured on Eva." Antonio scrambled to retrieve it from where it had rolled beneath a nearby table, careful not to cut himself on the shattered glass. He placed it on Ralph's table like an offering, then retreated quickly. Ralph examined the bottle. Half empty now, the label stained with fingerprints and wine. He held it up to the light, watching the liquid catch the chandelier's glow. 2015 Barolo, he read aloud. "A good year. My father, God rest his miserable soul, used to say, you could tell everything about a man by how he treats good wine." He looked at Vince and Leo. "He also said you could tell everything about a man by how he treats people who can't fight back." He poured a glass slowly, the sound of wine hitting crystal unnaturally loud in the silence. "My father was a drunk and a coward, but he was right about that second part." Ralph lifted the glass, studying it. "Come here, both of you, stand." Vince and Leo rose on shaking legs, their black polo shirts wrinkled now, stained with their own nervous sweat. They approached Ralph's table like condemned men walking to the gallows. "Closer." Ralph gestured with the glass. When they stood directly before him, he set it down on the white tablecloth. "This is the same bottle you used on Eva, the same wine that's currently soaking into her clothes, her hair, her dignity. I want you to drink it." Leo's eyes widened. "Boss, did I ask you to speak?" Ralph's voice remained calm, but something in it made Leo's mouth snap shut. "I said drink. From this glass. The wine you thought was worth less than a woman's respect." Vince reached for the glass with a trembling hand. He brought it to his lips, took a sip. His face contorted, whether from the wine's taste or his own shame, was impossible to tell. "All of it," Ralph said. Vince drained the glass, wine running down the corners of his mouth. He set it down too hard, and the crystal rang like a bell. Ralph refilled it, handed it to Leo. "Your turn." Leo drank, eyes squeezed shut, throat working to swallow. When he finished, he looked like he might be sick. "How does it taste?" Ralph asked conversationally. "Does it taste like power? Like your big men, teaching lessons to people who can't defend themselves?" Neither answered. Ralph stood, buttoned his jacket. "No, I didn't think so." He walked around them in a slow circle, a shark considering prey. "A man who can pour wine on a woman has already poured shame on himself. But you didn't know that, did you? You thought cruelty was strength. You thought my name was a shield for your weakness." He stopped directly in front of them. "I built everything I have on 3 rules. Don't steal from family, don't lie to family, and never raise your hand to a woman or child." His voice hardened to steel. "You broke the 3rd rule in my house, in front of my guests, to my employee. So now we're going to have a conversation about what that costs." The door to the back hallway opened. Eva emerged, wearing one of Ralph's spare shirts, a white dress shirt that hung to her knees, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was damp from washing, her face scrubbed clean. She'd stopped crying, but her eyes were still red-rimmed. She froze when she saw Vince and Leo standing at Ralph's table, saw the wine glass, saw the way every person in the restaurant was watching. "Eva," Ralph said gently, "come here, please." She approached slowly, hugging herself. When she reached Ralph's side, he gestured to the 2 men. "These men owe you an apology. But before they give it, I want you to understand something." He looked at Vince and Leo with eyes like winter. "In my world, we have codes, lines we don't cross. These men crossed one tonight, They forgot that respect isn't about power, it's about recognizing the humanity in everyone, especially those who serve us. He turned back to Eva. They're going to apologize now, and then they're going to learn what it feels like to kneel before the very people they humiliated. Not because I'm cruel, but because some lessons can only be learned through shame. Eva's voice was barely audible. Mr. Bellows, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His tone was final. Because if I don't, tomorrow there will be another Eva, another bottle, another man who thinks my name gives him permission to be a monster. He looked at Vince and Leo. Apologize, now. And make it sincere, because I'll know if it's not. Vince's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Eva, then at Ralph, then back at Eva. The words seemed trapped somewhere in his throat, tangled with pride and fear and the sudden realization that everything he'd built, his reputation, his position, perhaps even his life, hung on what came next. I'm sorry, he finally managed. The words came out strangled, barely audible. Louder. Ralph's voice was soft as silk, sharp as a razor. Everyone in this room should hear you. The same way they heard Eva's apologies when you were pouring wine over her head. Vince's face flushed red. I'm sorry, Eva, for what I did. For humiliating you. Leo spoke without prompting, his voice steadier but hollow. I'm sorry too. It was wrong. We were wrong. Eva stood there in Ralph's oversized shirt, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. She looked small and young and impossibly dignified. I thank you, she whispered, because her mother had raised her to accept apologies even from monsters. Ralph studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he snapped his fingers once, sharp as a gunshot. Two men emerged from the kitchen, not waiters, but Carlo and James, Ralph's most trusted enforcers. They carried between them two large silver bowls, the kind restaurants used for mixing salads or washing produce. They set them on the floor in front of Vince and Leo with a metallic thunk that echoed through the silent room. Fill them, Ralph said to Antonio. Halfway, same wine they used. Antonio's hands shook as he took bottles from the bar, not the expensive Barolo, but the house red, the kind served by the glass to customers who didn't know better. He poured slowly, the wine splashing into the bowls like blood into a basin. The smell filled the air, sweet and sharp and somehow sickening in this context. When both bowls were half full, Ralph gestured to Vince and Leo. Kneel again. In front of the bowls. Boss, Vince started. Kneel. They dropped to their knees. The marble must have been cold and hard, but neither man dared complain. The silver bowls sat before them like accusatory mirrors, reflecting their faces in dark red liquid. Ralph walked around them slowly, hands clasped behind his back. Every eye in the restaurant followed him, the diners at their tables, the waiters along the walls, the musicians still clutching their instruments. Eva remained where she was, one hand pressed to her mouth. You mistake cruelty for strength, Ralph said, his voice carrying easily through the silence. You think because I've killed men, because I've built an empire on blood and fear, that means I'm without limits, without conscience. He stopped behind them, looking down at their bowed heads. But a man who cannot control his hand cannot control his soul. And a man who uses power to humiliate the powerless is the weakest creature that walks this earth. He circled back to face them. You poured wine on Eva like she was nothing. Like her dignity, her humanity, her pain meant less than your wounded pride over a stained shirt. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Now you'll drink from what you wasted. Drink until you taste the respect you lost. Vince looked up, his face pale. You can't be serious. Do I look like I'm joking? Ralph's expression could have been carved from granite. Boss, please. Drink, or I'll hold your face in it myself. Vince leaned forward, hands trembling as he gripped the sides of the bowl. He lowered his face to the wine like a dog to water. The first sip made him gag. The second made him cough. By the third, tears were streaming down his face, whether from the wine or shame or terror was impossible to tell. Leo followed, his shoulders shaking as he drank. The sound of their swallowing, their choking, their barely suppressed sobs filled the restaurant like a grotesque symphony. More, Ralph said after they'd each taken 5 or 6 mouthfuls. Until the bowls are half empty. Until you've consumed the same amount you poured on her. The diners watched in horrified fascination. Some looked away. One woman was crying quietly into her napkin, but no one left. No one could leave, because Ralph Bellows had locked the doors, and what was happening here was more than punishment. It was lesson, sermon, and warning all at once. Vince choked on a mouthful and vomited wine back into the bowl. Ralph didn't stop him, didn't comfort him, just waited until he could continue. 20 minutes passed. 20 minutes of drinking and gagging and quiet weeping. When both bowls were finally half empty, when both men were covered in wine and their own spit and shame, Ralph raised his hand. Enough. They collapsed backward, gasping. The front of their black polo shirts was soaked dark red, wine dripping from their chins. They looked like they'd been baptized in blood. And then Eva did something no one expected. She stepped forward. "Please, Mr. Bellows." Her voice shook but held firm. "Please don't hurt them anymore. I forgive them. If this scene shook you, if you believe power should protect, not destroy, subscribe right now. Because some stories don't just entertain, they remind us who we should never become." The words hung in the air like a struck bell, reverberating through the stunned silence of La Perla Rosso. Every head turned toward Eva, the small Latina woman in an oversized white shirt, standing with her hands clasped in front of her, still trembling but somehow resolute. Ralph stared at her. For the first time that evening, his carefully controlled expression cracked. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, or memory. "What did you say?" His voice was soft, almost uncertain. "I forgive them." Eva's voice was stronger now, though tears glistened in her eyes. "Please, Mr. Bellows. They've learned their lesson. Don't hurt them anymore." Vince and Leo remained on their knees, wine-soaked and gasping, staring at Eva like she'd materialized from thin air, like she was an angel or a ghost or something they couldn't quite comprehend. "They humiliated you," Ralph said, his tone careful, measured. "They poured wine on your head like you were garbage, made you kneel in front of all these people. And you're asking me to show them mercy?" Eva nodded, wiping at her eyes with the oversized sleeve of Ralph's shirt. "Yes, because..." She drew a shaky breath. "Because my grandmother always told me that the strongest people aren't the ones who can destroy others. They're the ones who can choose not to." The words hit Ralph like a physical blow. He took a step back, his hand rising unconsciously to his chest. His eyes had gone distant, seeing someone who wasn't in the room. "Ralphie, you don't have to be like Papa," Maria had whispered that night 27 years ago. She was 16, bleeding in his arms in the back of a taxi, racing toward a hospital they'd never reach in time. Promise me you'll be better than him. That you'll protect people, not hurt them. That you'll remember kindness still matters." "I promise," he'd lied, because he'd already planned the murder, already chosen violence, already decided that mercy was weakness. Maria had smiled anyway, touched his face with a bloody hand. "You're a good man, Ralphie. Don't forget that." She died 2 minutes later. Ralph blinked, and he was back in the restaurant. Eva stood before him, this woman who'd shown him nothing but quiet compassion for 3 years, who'd stayed late to make him coffee when his hands still shook from things he couldn't name, who'd never asked questions, never judged, never treated him like the monster he knew he was. She looked like Maria. Not the face Maria had been Italian, fair-skinned, dark-haired, but the spirit, that stubborn, inexplicable goodness that refused to die even when surrounded by darkness. "You shouldn't forgive monsters," Ralph said quietly. The words were meant for Eva but felt like they were really meant for himself. Eva met his eyes. "Then teach them not to be." The silence that followed was different from before. Not tense or terrified, but heavy with something else. Something that felt like the moment before thunder, before rain, before the world shifts and everything changes. Ralph looked down at Vince and Leo. They stared up at him with the eyes of men who'd seen their own deaths and somehow, impossibly, been given a reprieve they didn't deserve. "Stand up," Ralph said. They struggled to their feet, wine dripping from their clothes, their dignity in ruins. Vince swayed slightly, his face pale green. Leo kept his eyes on the floor. Ralph walked to his table, picked up his glass of wine, the one he'd poured at the beginning of this nightmare, and took a long sip. When he set it down, his hand was perfectly steady. "You're both exiled," he said. "Effective immediately. You'll leave New York tonight. There's a failing casino in Nevada, the Desert Rose, outside Reno. You're going to rebuild it, make it profitable, turn it into something that generates legitimate revenue instead of just laundering money." Vince's head snapped up. "Boss, that place is a death trap. It's been bleeding money for 5 years, I know." Ralph's voice was flat. "Which is why it's perfect for you. You'll work there until I decide you've paid your debt. Could be a year, could be 10, could be never. You're not... Leo's voice cracked. You're not going to kill us? Ralph looked at Eva, who stood watching with her hands pressed over her heart, tears streaming freely down her face now. No, he said quietly. I'm not going to kill you. Because someone in this room reminded me that death is easy. It's living with your shame that's hard. He turned back to them, his expression hard as iron. But understand this. If I ever hear that either of you raised your hand to a woman again, if I even suspect it, I won't be this merciful. There won't be bowls of wine and philosophical lessons. There will just be a hole in the desert and your name's forgotten. Are we clear? Yes, boss, they said in unison, their voices hoarse. Good. Carlo, James, escort them out. Make sure they're on a flight tonight. The two enforcers moved forward, gripping Vince and Leo by their arms. As they were led toward the exit, Vince looked back at Eva. Thank you, he whispered. She nodded but said nothing. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Ralph stood in the center of his restaurant, surrounded by witnesses to something they'd never forget, and felt the weight of 27 years pressing down on his shoulders. Eva, he said without looking at her, take the rest of the week off, with pay, and thank you. For what, Mr. Bellows? He finally turned to face her, and in his eyes was something she'd never seen before, something vulnerable and raw and almost human. For reminding me that I had a sister once, and that I promised her I'd be better than my father. The restaurant emptied slowly after Ralph gave the order. Diners filed out in hushed groups, their expensive meals left half-eaten, their conversations reduced to whispers. They'd come for osso, buco, and barolo, but they'd witnessed something else entirely. A morality play performed with wine and shame, instead of blood and bullets. By midnight, La Perla Rosa was silent except for the soft clink of glasses as waiters cleaned up. Eva had left an hour earlier, driven home by Antonio in Ralph's personal car. Ralph remained at his corner table, a fresh glass of wine untouched before him, his eyes fixed on the stain where Eva had knelt. Boss. Carlo appeared from the kitchen, his hulking frame somehow cautious. They're on the 2 a.m. flight to Vegas. I made sure they understood the terms. Ralph nodded without looking up. Good. The men are talking, Carlo continued, his voice careful. About what happened here tonight. About you, sparing them. Let them talk. Some are saying you've gone soft. Carlo shifted his weight. That mercy makes you weak. Now Ralph did look up, his dark eyes meeting Carlo's. Do you think I'm weak, Carlo? No, boss. Never. Carlo's response was immediate, genuine. But Vince and Leo, they broke your rules. In front of witnesses. In the old days, they'd be dead already. In the old days, I was a different man. Ralph lifted his glass, studied the wine in the candlelight. Or maybe I was trying to be. Trying to convince myself that violence was strength, that fear was respect, that the only way to protect what you love is to destroy everything that threatens it. He took a sip, set the glass down with deliberate care. My sister Maria used to say that the hardest thing in the world isn't killing your enemies. It's choosing not to, even when you have every right, even when they deserve it. Carlo was quiet for a moment. She sounds like she was a good woman. She was, too good for this world. Ralph's voice went distant. She died because I couldn't protect her. Because I was too busy building an empire to notice she was drowning. And when I finally did notice, when I finally tried to help, it was too late. He stood, buttoning his jacket. So no, Carlo, I'm not going soft. I'm trying to keep a promise I made 27 years ago to a dying 16-year-old girl. A promise that I'd be better than the man who raised me, better than the world that killed her. Carlo nodded slowly. What about the others? The men who think this makes you weak? Let them think what they want. Ralph's voice hardened. Anyone who mistakes mercy for weakness is welcome to test me. They'll learn the difference quickly enough. He walked toward the exit, pausing at the door. Close up tonight. And Carlo? Tomorrow I want you to find out everything about Eva Seely's life. Her mother in Honduras, her bills, her struggles, everything. You planning something, boss? Ralph smiled, the expression neither warm nor cold but something in between. I'm planning to make sure that the one person in this godforsaken city who showed me kindness never has to worry about money again. 3 hours later, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Ralph sat alone in the dark. The city sprawled beneath him, a constellation of lights and lives, each one a story he'd never know. His phone buzzed. A text from his consigliere, Vincent D'Angelo. Hearing rumors about tonight. True, you let Vince and Leo live after they assaulted one of your people? Ralph typed back. They didn't assault her. They humiliated her. Different crime, different punishment. The families are watching. They think you're losing your edge. Let them watch. I've been doing this 30 years. I don't need to prove myself to anyone. A pause. Then, be careful, Ralph. Mercy can look like weakness to the wrong people, and weakness invites challenges. Ralph didn't respond. He set the phone down and poured himself a scotch from the crystal decanter on his desk. 18-year-old single malt, smooth as silk, expensive as sin. His office was decorated with the trappings of success: original artwork, leather furniture, a desk made from reclaimed wood that cost more than most people's cars. But the only thing Ralph really cared about was the photograph on the shelf behind his desk, hidden from casual view. Maria at 14, grinning at the camera with braces and wild hair, her arm around Ralph's shoulders. He'd been 19 then, already running with the wrong crowds, already making the choices that would define his life. She'd loved him anyway, believed in him anyway, saw something good in him that he'd spent decades trying to kill. I kept your promise tonight, Maria, he said to the empty room. I chose mercy over vengeance, chose to teach instead of destroy. I hope that counts for something. The city didn't answer. It never did. The next morning, Ralph called a meeting of his inner circle, the 6 men who controlled his operations across New York. They gathered in a private room above a butcher shop in Little Italy, the kind of place that looked innocent but had seen more blood than most emergency rooms. They sat around a table scarred with decades of use, their faces hard, their eyes watchful. These were men who'd killed for Ralph, lied for Ralph, built fortunes for Ralph. Men who expected the same cold calculation they'd always known. I know you've heard about last night, Ralph began without preamble. About what happened at La Perla Rosso, about Vince and Leo. We heard you went soft, said Jimmy Marcone, one of the older captains, that you let them walk after they disrespected you. Ralph's expression didn't change. Is that what you think? That I went soft? Jimmy shrugged. In the old days, they'd be dead. Message sent, problem solved. Now they're in Nevada playing poker. Doesn't exactly inspire fear, boss. Ralph stood, walked to the window. Outside, tourists wandered past, taking photos of authentic Italian delis, completely unaware of what happened in the room above their heads. Fear, Ralph said quietly, is the cheapest currency in our world. Any idiot with a gun can inspire fear. Any thug can kill someone and call it strength. He turned to face them. But respect? Real respect? That's earned. That requires something infinitely harder than violence. Which is? Jimmy's tone was skeptical. Control. Ralph's voice was steel wrapped in silk. The ability to hold someone's life in your hands and choose to let them live. Not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to show mercy when everyone expects blood. Another captain, Tommy Ricci, spoke up. With respect, boss, the other families won't see it that way. They'll see an opening, an opportunity. Let them. Ralph returned to his seat. I've been building this empire for 30 years. I've survived 5 wars, 3 attempted coups, and more betrayals than I can count. Not because I was the most violent, but because I was the most disciplined. Because I knew when to fight and when to forgive. He looked at each man in turn. Eva Seeley reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that there are still lines worth respecting, still codes worth keeping, still promises worth honoring, even when they cost you. The room was silent. So here's what's going to happen, Ralph continued. Anyone who thinks mercy makes me weak is welcome to challenge me. I'll meet them in the street, barehanded if they prefer. We'll settle it the old way, and then everyone will understand that I didn't spare Vince and Leo because I couldn't kill them. I spared them because I chose to. Jimmy nodded slowly. And if the other families move against us? Ralph smiled, the expression cold as winter. Then they'll learn the hard way that mercy and weakness are 2 very different things. 2 weeks passed. The Desert Rose Casino in Nevada was everything Vince had feared, a dying monument to better days. Its neon sign flickering like a weak heartbeat, its carpets stained with decades of cigarette ash and broken dreams. The place hemorrhaged money daily, and the few customers who wandered in were either desperate or lost. Leo threw himself into the work. He arrived early, stayed late, learned the books, talked to employees, tried to understand why a casino in the middle of gambling country couldn't turn a profit. He'd wake at dawn covered in cold sweat, remembering the taste of wine, the shame of kneeling, Eva's quiet voice forgiving him when he deserved none. Vince was different. He showed up late, left early, spent most of his time drinking in the empty bar. His shame had curdled into something darker, a festering resentment that grew with each passing day. In his mind, the story had shifted. He wasn't the villain who'd humiliated an innocent woman. He was the victim, punished unfairly, exiled for a simple mistake. And it was Eva's fault. She made me look weak, Vince muttered one night, 3 whiskeys deep, forgiving me in front of everyone like I was some kind of animal that needed taming. Leo looked up from the spreadsheet he'd been studying. She showed you mercy, Vince. We should be grateful. Grateful? Vince's laugh was bitter. We should be running crews in Manhattan. Instead, we're babysitting slot machines in the middle of nowhere because that bitch couldn't take a joke. It wasn't a joke. Leo's voice was quiet but firm. We humiliated her. We deserved worse than this. Vince slammed his glass down. You've gone soft. Just like the boss. This whole thing, the mercy, the forgiveness, the second chances, it's weakness. And weakness gets you killed in our world. Or maybe, Leo said carefully, it takes more strength to show mercy than to pull a trigger. Vince stared at him with something like disgust. You sound like her now. Like that waitress. Maybe you should go back and marry her, if you love her so much. Leo stood, gathering his papers. I'm going to make this place work, Vince. I'm going to prove to Mr. Bellows that his mercy wasn't wasted on me. What you do is your business. He left Vince alone in the bar, surrounded by empty glasses and darker thoughts. Back in New York, Ralph had kept his promise. He'd learned everything about Eva's life, the remittances she sent to her mother every month for medical bills, the second job she worked at a laundromat on weekends, the student loans from a degree she'd never finished because her father died and someone had to provide. He'd paid off the student loans anonymously, sent money to her mother's doctors in Honduras, enough to cover 2 years of treatment, raised Eva's salary at La Perla Rosso to manager level, though she still insisted on waiting tables because she liked talking to people. The restaurant had changed since that night. Word had spread not the details but the essence. That something had happened at Ralph Bellows's place, that mercy had been shown, that even in the underworld, codes still mattered. Business was better than ever. People came not just for the food, but for the feeling that they were dining in a place where respect still meant something. Ralph watched it all from his corner table, Eva moving through the dining room with quiet grace, her smile genuine now, her shoulders no longer hunched in defensive anticipation. She'd started wearing her hair down, had bought new clothes with her increased salary. She looked happy. It made Ralph think of Maria, but his contentment was shattered one Thursday evening when Carlo appeared at his table. His expression grim. Boss, we have a problem. Vince is missing. Ralph set down his wine glass carefully. Missing how? He left Nevada 3 days ago. Told Leo he was visiting family in Jersey, but his family hasn't seen him, and his phone's off. A cold weight settled in Ralph's chest. Find him. Now. Use every resource we have. Already on it. But boss, Carlo hesitated. Leo called. Said Vince has been different lately, angry, talking about how the punishment was unfair, how Eva ruined his life. Ralph's jaw tightened. Where's Eva now? In the kitchen, checking tomorrow's deliveries. Get her. Bring her to my office. And Carlo locked down the restaurant. No one in or out until I say otherwise. Carlo nodded and disappeared. Ralph stood, his mind racing through possibilities, each one darker than the last. Mercy had failed. He'd given Vince a second chance, and Vince had chosen to throw it away. Eva appeared in Ralph's office 10 minutes later, confusion written across her face. Mr. Bellows? Carlo said you wanted to see me? Sit down, Eva. Ralph's voice was gentle, but his eyes were hard. We have a situation. He explained about Vince, the disappearance, the anger, the possibility that he might return to New York seeking revenge. Eva's face went pale as she listened. He blames me? Her voice was small. But I forgave him. I tried to help him. I know. Ralph leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. And that's exactly why he's dangerous. Some men can't accept forgiveness. It reminds them too much of their own weakness. What are we going to do? You're going to stay here, in the restaurant, where I can protect you. I've already called in extra security. The explosion of shattering glass cut him off. Both of them froze. Then came the screaming from the dining room. Ralph was moving before he could think, pulling a pistol from his desk drawer, his body shifting into the cold efficiency of a man who'd survived 30 years in a world designed to kill him. Eva followed, ignoring his shouted order to stay put. They burst into the dining room to chaos. Tables overturned, diners pressed against walls, waiters frozen in terror. And there, in the center of it all, stood Vince. He'd lost weight, his black polo shirt hanging loose, his eyes wild and bloodshot. In his right hand, he held a pistol. In his left, a bottle of wine. "There she is," Vince said, his voice shaking with rage and something else. Desperation, perhaps, or madness. The saint, the angel, the bitch who ruined my life. "Vince," Ralph's voice cut through the hysteria like a blade. "Put the gun down." "Why?" Vince laughed, the sound unhinged. "So you can forgive me again? So she can look at me with those pitying eyes and make me feel like a monster?" "You are a monster," Ralph said quietly, stepping between Vince and Eva. "But you don't have to die one. I'm already dead." Vince's hand was shaking, the gun wavering. "You killed me that night. You and her. You took everything, my reputation, my place in the family, my self-respect, and you gave me mercy like it was some kind of gift. But it wasn't. It was torture." Eva stepped around Ralph before he could stop her. "Vince, please. I never wanted to hurt you." "Don't," Ralph grabbed for her, but she'd already moved too far forward. "I just wanted the pain to stop," Eva continued, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "The humiliation, the shame, the feeling of being nothing. I forgave you because I know what it's like to be broken, and I hoped that maybe forgiveness could help you heal instead of destroy you." Vince stared at her, the gun still raised. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or the ghost of the man he'd been before shame consumed him. Then the door behind him burst open. Leo stood there, soaking wet from rain that had just started falling outside, his chest heaving like he'd run the entire way from the airport. "Vince, don't." Leo's voice cracked. "Please, brother, this isn't the way." "You." Vince turned, the gun swinging toward Leo. "You chose them over me. You chose this fake redemption over loyalty." "I chose to be better," Leo said, stepping forward slowly. "And so can you. It's not too late. We can—" Vince pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. But Leo was already moving, his body crashing into Vince's, sending them both sprawling. The bullet shattered a mirror behind the bar. Ralph moved like lightning, covering the distance in 3 strides. He kicked the gun from Vince's hand, pressed his own pistol to the back of Vince's skull. "Don't move." But Vince wasn't moving. He was sobbing, face pressed against the wine-stained marble, his body shaking with the kind of grief that destroys men from the inside out. "I'm sorry," Vince gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't live with what I'd become." Eva knelt beside him, her hand hovering over his shoulder but not quite touching. "Then become something else." Ralph looked at her, this woman who'd faced down a gun with forgiveness, and made a decision. "Leo, get him up. We're taking him to a hospital. Psychiatric care, not a morgue." Leo's eyes widened. "Boss, after what he just did, he proved that mercy failed." Ernest, washing across the marble floor, mixing with spilled wine, diluting the stains until they were pale as ghosts. 6 weeks later, autumn had settled over New York like a blanket, turning the trees in Central Park gold and crimson. La Perla Rosso had reopened with new windows, refinished floors, and a bronze plaque beside the entrance that read, "Respect is the only wine worth serving." Eva stood behind the host stand, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing a manager's jacket that actually fit. She greeted guests with the same warm smile, but now there was something else, a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from surviving storms and discovering you're stronger than you knew. Ralph sat at his corner table, but he came less frequently now. The empire still ran, the money still flowed, but something had shifted in him that night in the rain. He'd started attending Maria's grave every week, bringing fresh flowers, talking to her about the choices he'd made, the promises he'd kept and broken and kept again. Vince was in a facility upstate, under psychiatric care that Ralph paid for anonymously. The doctors said he was making progress, that the combination of medication and therapy was helping him understand the difference between shame and guilt, between punishment and healing. Leo visited him every week, driving 4 hours each way, refusing to give up on the man who'd once been his friend. Carlo had spread the word through the underworld. Ralph Bellows' mercy wasn't weakness. It was the most dangerous kind of strength, the kind that made men question everything they thought they knew about power. The other families had tested him, of course. Small provocations, boundary pushing, the usual games. Ralph had responded with the same cold precision he'd always shown, proving that mercy and violence could coexist in the same man, that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting how to fight. But the real change was subtler, harder to measure. It was in the way his men treated the people who worked for them, the way disputes were settled with conversation before bullets, the way, slowly, almost imperceptibly, respect started meaning something different than fear. One evening, as Eva was closing up, Ralph appeared at the door. He wore a simple black coat, his hands in his pockets, rain beginning to fall behind him. "Mr. Bellows." Eva smiled. "We're closed, but I can make you. I'm not here for dinner." Ralph stepped inside, water dripping from his shoulders. "I'm here to say thank you." Eva tilted her head. "For what?" "For reminding me that not every stain has to be washed in blood." He looked around the restaurant, the gleaming tables, the polished bar, the faces of customers visible through the window. "My sister Maria made me promise, before she died, that I'd be better than the man who raised me. For 27 years, I thought that meant being less violent, less cruel, but you taught me it means something different." "What's that?" "Being more human." Ralph's voice was soft. "Remembering that mercy isn't about what they deserve. It's about who you choose to be when you have all the power." Eva's eyes glistened. "Your sister would be proud of you." "Maybe." Ralph smiled, the expression sad but genuine. "I hope so." He turned to leave, paused at the door. "There's an envelope in your office. Consider it a bonus for services rendered. Mr. Bellows, you already gave me a raise. It's not from me. It's from the Bellows Foundation, a new nonprofit I'm starting. Scholarships for people who had to leave school to support their families. You're the first recipient full ride. Any degree you want, any college that accepts you." Eva's hand flew to her mouth. "I can't. That's too much." "You reminded a monster that he was once human, Eva. That's worth more than any degree." Ralph opened the door, rain falling harder now. "Use it well." He disappeared into the night, leaving Eva standing in the empty restaurant, tears streaming down her face, her heart full of something that felt like hope. 6 months later, rumors began to circulate, stories of a mafia boss who'd changed, who still commanded respect through strength but tempered it with something unexpected: justice. Not the legal kind, but the older kind, the kind that recognized complexity, that understood punishment without rehabilitation, was just cruelty in a different form. La Perla Rosso became a legend, not for what happened there, but for what didn't happen. It became the place where mercy defeated vengeance, where a waitress's forgiveness saved 3 men's souls, where the most feared man in New York learned to be afraid of losing his humanity. And sometimes, on rainy Thursday evenings, if you were lucky, you might see Ralph Bellows sitting alone at the corner table, not eating, just watching. Watching Eva greet customers with her warm smile, watching people treat each other with basic decency, watching proof that even in a world built on blood and fear, kindness could survive if someone was brave enough to protect it. The narrator's voice fades in one final time, soft as falling rain. That night at La Perla Rosso, a mafia boss taught the world that power doesn't come from how loud you shout, but from how quietly you can forgive. That mercy isn't weakness, it's the rarest form of strength. And that even in darkness, even in a life soaked in violence and regret, redemption is possible for those brave enough to choose it. Some wounds don't live on the skin. They live in the heart. But so does healing if you're willing to let it. Thanks for sticking with this story till the end. If you enjoyed it, you're going to love the next one. It's packed with unexpected turns and heartfelt moments. Click the image on your screen to keep the journey going, and make sure to hit subscribe for more amazing stories. Drop a comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I can't wait to see what you think.